Hello and welcome to Built on Air, a podcast and video series about all things Airtable. Built on Air is sponsored by OpenSide. Visit openside.com for products and services that will take your Airtable to the next level. I'm your host, Zoe Vanderplu, and this demo is led by our guest, Sarah Henry, a user researcher, designer, and strategist based in Brooklyn, New York. Her base, called Lean Design Research for Emotional Data, shows how user researchers can utilize Airtable to champion data-informed design practice while also maintaining the humanity of user feedback. Visit BuiltOnAir.com for a full interview with Sarah, and while you're at it, subscribe to the Built on Air newsletter, where you can get updates on new episodes and all things Airtable. So I guess now would be a pretty good kind of time to segue into your lean design research for emotional data, your Airtable base. And then I think what I'm kind of curious also, as we're kind of going through and you're showing it to us, if there are things, additional things you think of that you're oh yeah, I've improved this and added this, or even things where you're I'm still kind of working on this particular problem of how to organize this in Airtable, just to kind of give us some insights, because I know you've been kind of building, some iterations of this, and that would be cool to explore. So yeah. I'll let you go ahead and share your screen and just kind of walk us through.
Yeah, so let's do that. All right, so can you see Lean Design Research?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm going to start. So we've got at the very top, it says completed research, and that is the final view for where all of the research information goes. I'm going to skip that for now.
Stop really quick, because I want to back up, because we'll be kind of splitting this. Maybe first, I know we've been talking about this throughout the sort of interview, but if you could just give a quick, maybe couple sentence or whatever, just intro to what this is and what the goal was when you created it, and then just continue rolling as you were.
Sure. Yeah. So this is the Lean Design Research for Emotional Data database. There's a lot of kind of jargony made up words there. And I put them together in a particular way because I had two goals. The first was to demonstrate, and that's the lean design research part, that it's really easy to make a whole design research system. I'm a team of one when it comes to design research, and this really helps me to organize all of my research, make sure that I'm involving the right kind of participants, that I'm not overtaxing them with lots of calls to join research, and that I know what their background is and what kind of products they're familiar with. So it really helps me just get a lot of value out of my research and also keep it organized. So that's the lean design research part. The second part is this emotional data thing, which is also totally a made up jargony term that really means quantifying the qualitative information of how participants feel when they use your products. And so it's getting away from usability and validation and getting more toward is this actually a thing that people enjoy and are invested in or trust or find that they can be casual with the product? What are those more nuanced ways of thinking about people being able to use your product or not? And so I wanted to demonstrate that really nuanced kind of human level stuff doesn't have to be in the realm of just design research. You can really quickly demonstrate to your team how people feel. And so there's this method called, it's from social science. It's called coding, but it's not computer programming. It's a way of categorizing through a rubric how large swaths of text. So an interview, for instance, it's saying very quickly, this is a word that sums up what this person meant. And then once you've got that word, you can do a lot more quick sort of quantitative analysis with it. So there's a lot of concepts packed into what the space is, and maybe it accomplishes some of what I set out to do, but mostly it just kind of gets it all in one space.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So take us through it, and we'll just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Yeah. So this first page, this completed research page, I'm going to come back to it, but it is kind of the the full summary of everything else, everything that every piece of data plugs into this page. So we'll end here, and hopefully that it'll be clear by the time you get there. but I'm going to start on this products page. So let's say you're a design researcher, you're new to your company, and you're a team of one, and you really just need to get a handle on how to start doing research. So I built this kind of with that intention. So you would start here on the product page, and you would write out like all of your products, like what environment they're on. And then I've got the internal team of people who work on them. And then going into the participant view, that's where the rest of this information comes from. But just to start, you would very quickly write out like, here are the products that I'm going to be testing. Here's like some information that I'll need to know about them technically. And then the rest of this is all coming from other tabs. And that's the kind of fun part about this base, is that there's a lot of interconnected automation that happens. So once you set up your product page and you've got your 5 products, let's say, that you want to test, then I started to set up the internal team page. And so that has all of the people who I'm working with and their role, what product that they're either aware of or working on or familiar with. And then the other 2 of these I'll talk about in a minute here, because they're linked from another page. So they're linked to this upcoming research.
The onion, right?
Yeah. It's and that's why I really
like an onion pretzel or something, right? 'Cause it's like
it's a twisty onion. Yeah. So the upcoming research is part of that lean process. This turns into a form. And I'm honestly like not sure if I can show that on Universe. I don't think I have that view.
But we can imagine that these are questions.
You can imagine. Yeah. So this was like when forms, I think, were just first implemented, and like I was like, oh great. So I send this form out to my internal team, and the form is really simple. It has a question like, what research are you interested in? The next question is, what product do you work on? Third question is, what's your name? So we get this information back where we've got this table of research questions, like, are users comfortable with logging out? Should we update our color scheme? And then I know who internally is asking that question, so I can involve them in my research. And then I also know what product, so I can later like plan out which products I'm testing, what their priority is. Priority would be a good column to add to this, by the way. So that upcoming research then plugs back in. We can see like the internal team, and we can see like their needs to know about. So that comes back to like, okay, so, I haven't talked to Lisa in a while. Like, what are her needs? And so it also keeps that research cadence like organized. And so I'm never dropping the ball on like what a product needs, but I'm also not burdening other people of my team with like making sure that they're constantly asking me.
Let's like get in a meeting and bring your 5 questions or whatever. They can just sort of passively flow that information to you.
Yeah, because the form is a standalone link, and like whenever they have a question, getting away from meetings, getting into like emails, it's great. So and then once we go to this product page, going back to this our products, this unanswered research, those are those questions. So I've always had that information in a multitude of ways, which I think is what's great about Airtable is it organizes information. And so based on how you want to receive that information, like how you best process it, I feel like it does a lot of that for you, of just reorganizing and giving it to you in a lot of different ways.
For sure, because you're like, I always kind of want to keep these questions in mind so you can just have them, wherever you're looking.
Yeah. And so let's go to the participants view. So this is kind of like the meat of it, or like the really big infrastructural, like underlying stuff, the data. So I have a column here that says participant name, and the next column is their agency name. So I have all of these agencies or the places they work. I can click into that record because it's a record, and I understand, okay, that's a vendor, this agency, for instance, or this firm, that they're a vendor, they are working at the local market. This was for a government organization, and so like local versus state versus national was important. I also know what products that person uses at their company, or what products are at use at that company, and then who's there, what they're like, all of their metadata of like their phone number, contact information, that kind of stuff, who their internal contact is at our company. So like it's everything. It's like everything I want to know about this particular company is in this record. And all of that information feeds into how I'm going to like plan my research. So for instance, let's say I wanted to look for participants, and I'm moving over now past all of the email, phone information, and I'm moving to this row or this column called experience. So let's say I wanted to look for experience of less than a year. I wanted people who are really new to their company or to their industry. And so I've got 2 people here that have experience of less than a year. And I can see only one of them uses the super secret new product that I want to test. And so that's my one participant that I'll call out. Similarly, if I wanted to find people who were, really advanced, had more than 10 years of experience, I could do that. And I could compare them, someone who is like really like a veteran of their field versus someone who's new to the field. How different are they in their ability to adapt to new software? That might be a research question. And very, very quickly, I can find 2 participants that have shared this information with me in a self-selected way. So because this can be a form, I can send out this form to anyone I meet at, say, a conference or a new agency that we're working with. And I can say, just, fill out as many of these as you feel comfortable. And if you want to join design research for, my company, just hit submit. And so they'll fill in this information for you, because a big problem with getting data is that it's like tedious. Yeah. And so I really love the Airtable approach of being able to like connect all this stuff through forms, or through like a form in like a MailChimp thing that was connected through Zapier or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So let me take off that filter. The other thing that I also list here is like, what products they use that I might be testing them on. Then I also know like what devices they have, product features that they love. And so again, this is all like, you can just ask them this, like, what do you like about our software? And that way, they might be more generous when you're like testing them on UI stuff, for instance, or they might be like really like cynical about how intuitive your products are if they hate that, which is another area for improvement. That's another column. So there's a lot of like just kind of intuitive human kind of stuff going on here. I can also say, okay, I want to filter by everyone who uses, say, like other apps used. I want to know everyone who uses Google Docs. And so that gives me really quickly like people who are familiar with collaborative online text software. Mm-hmm. So that's another way to kind of filter, especially for usability tests. Is this person even familiar with that kind of UI? So yeah. And then lastly, this last 3 columns here will participate again, associated test, and the not participant organization. So let's say these last 2 columns. This is where that like research cadence comes into play. So will participate again is a checkbox, and I can click that or unclick it. I don't think I can unclick it on this, but that's a like really nice way of keeping my list current. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit manual at this point, and I think at this point that's something I would want to improve upon that I haven't yet. But will participate again, like that should be like an email I send out every once in a while, like, hey, are you still interested in doing research with this company, and having that linked up to the form. So that helps me keep in my mind, like, who should I not email for testing, essentially. And also, if you were to if you wanted to automate this, that might be a field that you would, through Zapier, go share into like a MailChimp mailing list, where you're kind of regularly asking for people who want to do research, but that this is the do not contact list.
Right.
And then lastly, we've got associated tests, this column here, which shows me which tests they've already participated in. And so in that kind of the same way I described earlier, where if you see like 20 analog tags and they're all red, it gives you like almost like it's like heat seeking, where you go like, oh, okay, so there's a lot of that. Yeah. Like you can really quickly get a sense, without having to actually analyze this data, of just like an intuitive sense of like what the answer is to your question. And like, let's say my question is, who's done only one test? So I can quickly scan this column. Let me like widen it out a little bit. I can quickly scan this column and go like, oh, okay. So like, this Amy is cool. She's only done one. Karen O has only done one. And you can filter, of course, or you can do the pivot table or group these things, but also like I can just scan and just like quickly go like, all right, so let me contact like Sue and like Yana. That's great. And I know that I'm not like overtaxing them by asking them to do many, many tests over, or they're not like constantly kind of participating. So I'm not like wearing out their goodwill.
And then also visually like this too, you might kind of be looking for someone who's only done one test, but also like maybe someone who like really loves, like you said, like UI, or maybe like a couple of these areas that, you want to test. So it's not something where you're like, oh, I only want to see people like with these hard boundaries that a filter would give, but you can like, kind of just like, I like that where you kind of intuitively looked and it's like a soft filter, right? Because it's all visual. So it's just like your eyes, right? Basically.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I like about Airtable, is that it automates enough, but it still gives me a ton of agency to kind of, because I might be more imaginative if I'm actually just like looking at what people have studied or like, participated in before. And then I look over and I see like, oh yeah, I guess they're interested in consistency. This test doesn't do that, but the next test does. So maybe I'll hold off on talking to them this time. And so, yeah, it's just like that, human, relying on your own intelligence rather than automating everything.
Yeah. For sure.
So yeah, so I think that's everything up until the actual completed research. So let me go up to that main view. So this is organized according to research studies. So we've got like mobile product content test number 1, for instance. And I have the testing date and I have what product was tested. And these are records. So I can click in and learn more if I need to. That's also that thing about institutional knowledge. So like I know the super secret new product, which may never launch, but we did talk about it at some point. It's for OSX. The environment is OSX. The user persona who might use it as a casual user, and it's gone through a lot of different testing. And Monique and Lisa are responsible for it internally. Like there's just a ton of information here that if I were to bring on someone to work for me or work with me, I could easily go like, okay, take a look at these 5 records, and that like, and if you don't absorb it all at once, like it's always there for you to rely on.
Yeah.
So I like the record aspect. That's what like totally sold me on Airtable, which probably everybody says that, but
because it's like you don't have to be like, oh well, like okay, here's the product name, let me like look, open this other thing to like get the details, and by then you're like, well, I'm feeling lazy, like whatever, I'll just keep moving. But here it's like one click. It's so the barrier to get that information is so low,
Yeah, totally. So moving through these columns, screen type is pretty particular to the type of research I was doing at the time. It's not as generic as I would like. But like, let's just say you're, testing like a particular aspect of this mobile product and you're looking at like account detail. So that's a column that could be played with or improved upon. I think number of participants,
count field probably to count the number of linked records.
Yeah, I can't, because I can't tell because it's on.
Right, it doesn't give you, the universe, it doesn't give you. Well, everyone, if that question is just burning for anyone to know, they can definitely just download your base from the universe and check it out.
Cool. So that's hopefully automated. But like once you get into participants for those studies, like that's where this is to me really useful. And again, you can do that kind of like gut check, like just skim it and go like, okay, this looks pretty diverse. It looks like I'm not like asking one person their opinion all the time. And then of course, because these are records, everything about this person, which is useful for analysis. Like later when you're like really trying to find like quotes that support your opinion, for instance. And I know looking at Ellen here, her record, that she's a programmer and an analyst, and she's got a junior level of experience. And so she might have sort of an interesting perspective because she doesn't have like this, hardened view of her industry.
Right.
She's still sort of like excited about it.
Not the jaded lady at the DMV yet. She's like the young, friendly one.
Yeah. So if she's super skeptical, then her opinion, I think, is more valid and like more useful, let's say, for example.
Right.
So that's like I really like relying on that for analysis. It's like it's just like detective work. It's kind of fun. So then we get into test types. So this column lets me know if this is validation, usability, discovery. This is basically just standard design research stuff. You just need to know what kind of tests these are. Also, quick view, you can just say, okay, it looks like I've done an even mix of usability and validation. Like that's about the cadence that I want. Good for showing your manager like what you're working on. Yeah. And then similarly, test focus, like I could just like, sort this, and it looks like, okay, I've done like 2 visual design tests. And that maybe like might prompt me to go back to my visual designer and say like, hey, we haven't talked in a while. Is there anything you need? Things like that. And then test platform. So this tells me like what tool I'm using. I think Typeform actually connects to Airtable at this point, but I'm not sure about that.
You can definitely connect it via Zapier.
So this just kind of also helps me like locate where my results might be. So
right.
And it's I also tried to be pretty exhaustive with this, like all of the metadata for each of these tests. So like, we're still like in one test. Like this is a test that tested 2 products. It had 1 participant. It was usability, and we focused on content, and I used Typeform. So this is still just like metadata at this point of like what this test was. But now we're going to move into these last columns, which are where we get the emotional data side of things. And so I've since improved a lot on these, but I think they're still useful, and it kind of depends on what your goals are. So I tried to imagine that this table was for someone who was similarly to me, testing kind of like productivity or sort of digital infrastructure or kind of bureaucratic tools. Consumer tools might have different columns here, but that was my focus, so that's how I set this table up. So confidence rating is and I think this is an aggregate, I'm not sure though. Confidence rating is a thing that I asked people at the end of every test that I did. And it was like on a scale of like 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, how confident do you feel using this product based on what you've seen? So I asked that like, not because it's a great question, but because it is really easy to see improvement if you're testing over and over again. So like, let's go ahead and filter like product. So let's say we want to filter out where product contains a timeline. I guess let's do super secret. There we go. So we've got all the super secret, which is a stupid name, but it's fine. So we've got all the super secret ones where we're also looking at screen type, and that's got account. So I've got 10 tests here, and I can go back, and if they're then filtered by like, let's sort them by their date. So now I started at January 2016 and I end in March. I can look at my confidence rating and see the pattern. So we started at 6.5, we went up to 8.2, we even went up to 9, but we ended at 7.8. So how did we change our UI between January and March? What was the reason? And so it gives you this starting point to then go back and inquire and like really question your own research, and not also question like the design decisions that were made. So this confidence rating, like that question can be phrased in a number of different ways, but ultimately it's one numeric score that in this case is about understanding user confidence. But using that one score then like helps like us analyze the efficacy of our design process. Are we improving? Are we moving upward? And that's the same deal with this positive sentiment. So let's say positive, let's say, positive sentiment is just another like kind of, it can be a question. It could also just be like me as a researcher going like, sounds like this person was like pretty excited about the product the entire time. I'm going to like give them 100%. Like this can be interpretive if you want it to be.
Right.
But I want it to include sentiment, which is different than like a specific emotion. It's more just like good or bad. Like is this person like excited or not? It's more binary. And you can kind of phrase this any way you want, but let's say with this research, we started at 56%, where almost half and half of the participants were like, I guess that's all right, or it's great. But we ended at 90%. So just from these two columns, you start to see that there's like some issues with confidence. Like you're not necessarily creating a product that is inspiring confidence in people, but they are happier with it. And that's like, then that gives you all sorts of things to consider in the design process.
You're like, what does that really mean? Like for this specific product, do I need to be asking another question or do another test? And yeah, I think like that's sort of a good point where like also it's really like in this space, right? You're like where all data is always going to be sort of like fuzzy, where like it's not like, oh, this has a value of 6.5. It's more just like, okay, over time, right, as you collect all of the data in this table, like what is the behavior of that number, right?
Yeah, what's the pattern? Yeah. Yeah. And then similarly, because you've got this exhaustive process, you can go back and you can say, well, we had a really big dip here. We're now at 67% of people being, like feeling good about this product. Oh, it looks like we were testing usability, whereas the rest of these were validation. So we tested a new idea and that idea didn't work out.
Right.
So you can go back and just,
yeah.
And or you could even go further and say like, well, we test it with Tim, and Tim is like, he's still got that like naivete about his work, but he's got a graduate degree. So he's a technical expert. So maybe I should weight his opinion more and like go back and even ask him more questions if possible. And so there's just so much data here that if you truly want to get into the analysis portion of design research, this space provides a lot of resources for that.
Right.
So then lastly, like this user description and categorized description is where we get into the emotional data point. Usability results, that's just kind of that's another similar like that can be a question that you ask, or it can be something that as a researcher you just interpret for people. And that's another way to just describe, similar to positivity or confidence, like were they able to use the product? And so it's really just tackling that like usability aspect, which is part and parcel of design research. So I'm not going to talk anymore about that. I'm going to look at these last two columns here. So user description, and I'll expand this out so you can see, in this test, it was like one person and they said, excited for new features. Or let's go to another one where they said, interested in being able to access something. Sorry, I'm trying to find one that has like a lot. There we go. Okay. So in this case, we have, like various, these are poorly numbered, but you've got a lot of like qualitative information coming from the person where they say things like, oh, that's spot on, or it looks great, or the look is simple, but it's a little boring actually, but perfect for inspectors. In this case, this was software for code enforcement and inspectors that were going out at a local level in local government. Another thing that a user might say is this is fairly simple, or this is clean and targeted, or great job on the look. So you've got these like sentiments that are being pulled out from the interviews that if I had like a project manager that was really interested in just like literally what did people say, I could show them this. And I could show them like, here are like the relevant responses to the software. But you could also like then move into this categorized descriptions. And if you're really interested in getting more of a quantitative feel, that's where we can take like the term frustrated by the icons and just turn it into the word frustrated. Mm-hmm. And then when you see anything else, like, like let's say the person says, I just don't care about this. I don't get it. It doesn't feel right. That's also frustrated. If someone then is talking about the usability and they're like, this just doesn't work, cause so frustrated? So you start to get a lot of different perspectives that are summed up by one word. And that's where you can then do, okay, again, that pattern view of like, we started where people were ultimately intrigued and excited by the product. And then we kept testing, and we got to a point where we did a design change and we tested it and they started to get frustrated. So that's a bad direction. And then we kept going, and now they're familiar with the product. They kind of have like a neutral approach. And then we changed something, they got excited. Then we changed something again, and they got sort of wary of it. And so wary as a word might describe like someone saying like, yeah, I guess this is, this works, but it kind of just feels like software I used a few years ago. So like they might just not be as excited about the product, and you could write all that out and you could show that interview or use that quote, or you could also just sum it up in a word.
Right.
Yeah. So there is obviously the potential for bias here, and the potential also for just like misreading a situation. And I worry about that a little bit, but I also know that if you're continuously doing testing and you are really familiar with the product, and you also are familiar with your participants and kind of just living in that like researcher empathy interview space, you'll probably have a pretty good idea of what they meant, even if they like aren't super articulate. But you can hear their tone. If you're on video or in person, you can see their face, like you can see their body language. And so that's I think the skill of being a researcher, is being able to like really quickly kind of analyze like what is going on with this person, what are they reacting to, and how. And so that's where this categorized description column for me like gets really useful, because I don't have to remember an entire interview. I just have to remember some behavioral things that happened, some emotional things that happened. And it helps me qualify a lot of the language that you hear or see in quotes, or that I would otherwise present as like a defense of like a design decision, for instance.
Right. Yeah. So it's you're sort of like interpreting, right, all of these things that can't be quantified, and then also it's like Airtable just makes it so easy, right, for you to present it in these different ways. Like you're like, okay, well, I have like exactly what the user said, right? I have maybe like some numbers that they rated things at. I also have these descriptions that I'm sort of the keeper of. You can put that, and then I like to, right? It's like something like this is just so easy to like go along and. For example, if I were, a client looking at this, I would be like, oh, well, like, how did she come to this particular, conclusion, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can see all of the kind of like data there that you had to make your choice. And then it's, instead of having to like, watch the interview or like read a, PDF report where like I get to learn about like Mary Susan's troubles with like whatever the, saving function or whatever, like everything's here. And then I can just ask you more about it if I want to, but
Yeah.
I normally like, I wouldn't really have to ask much at all. It's kind of like just all there, and a very easy way to kind of lay out and see and digest.
Yeah. And I think like my personal view of design research, a lot of people see it as like validating a design decision, or even really just like having this kind of like sort of rote, like tedious, basic kind of like, okay, we already know what people are intuitively into.
Like,
and so a lot of people they just dismiss design research. But for me, this like helps. I feel like it's like it can be really creative. Like if I'm seeing an interview where people are like 85% positive, or they're like, yeah, this works, this is fine, but then they say something, and I'm just skipping around these like fake data points, but like let's say they say something like reminds me of email. So yeah, it works, but it's boring. Like it's familiar, they're neutral. And so it's not just validating. Instead, like you can take that information, especially if you have an enthusiastic design researcher who is themselves like, looking at design possibilities. And you could say like, okay, well, like let's change that direction. Let's not make it like familiar and boring and something that like everyone knows if they've ever opened Gmail. Like let's try to think about other interactions here that are like just much more interesting, or like, solve a different problem. So I see it as a jumping off point for creativity. And like that's what I try to embody in like, oh my God, I try to embody creativity in these spreadsheets. But like, it really is just like, here's like a design prompt. Like, here's like a jumping off point for like really getting creative with your design work, because you've got a constraint, and that constraint is, yeah, people like it, but they're a little bored. What do you do next?
Yeah, and I really like sort of your idea where it's so problem solving, right? Of course, it's creativity, but also it's like you can be exercise creativity and actually identifying the problems or areas for improvement, because I think some of, especially in design research, which is like people, I feel like so much of it is done badly that people write it off just because like very few people know how to do it well. It really gives you like this creativity to also identify a problem correctly, which
Yeah.
kind of leads you down so many different paths. So like you said, it's like you can be like, oh well, like these two things, like the data says this, but actually like let's dig into it. Is this really like what we should be pulling from this? Or like, oh well, maybe I thought X was where we should focus on or improve, but then after you run like 3 more tests, you can be like, oh no, actually seeing all of this together, I actually think this. So yeah, it's sort of like a creative diagnostic tool, really, is what you built here.
Totally. Yeah.
Really cool.
That's a great way of putting that.
Yeah, thank you so much for showing us this and kind of walking through it. And yeah, we'll look forward maybe to future iterations of your sort of like your Airtable like mastermind like creative data solutions.
Yeah, I gotta get better at making like dummy data. Like some of this.
Oh, it's so hard. I know, it's so annoying. Yeah, right. It's like you're like, I have this base, I would share it, but then I have to populate it with stuff. Yeah, that's like the most annoying part.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Where can people find you if they just kind of want to contact you or check out your work?
Yeah. So I have a website that's super basic right now. It's sarahbhenry.com. So that's Sarah, SARAHB, as in Brittany, my middle name, and then Henry, HENRY.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I am mostly like way too political at this point because it's like it stopped being like my professional nice Twitter that talks about design, and I'm just like, oh my God, the world's on fire. So if you would like politicized rantings, I'm at Sarah Henry, no vowels, so it's SRHHNRY at Sarah Henry on Twitter. I don't recommend it, but it's still there. But yeah, you can get in contact with me
in the show notes for design related. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for talking to us kind of about your this really cool path you're going down, your philosophies, and then also just showing us kind of how you've used Airtable to really like just harness this data in such a cool way.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been really fun talking about it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.